You really want to make sure that you have multiple different layers of defense that are orthogonal to each other. And so if something does get through one of them, the other ones can help.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the CyberWire's Hacking Humans podcast, where each week we look behind the social engineering scams, phishing schemes, and criminal exploits that are making headlines and taking a heavy toll on organizations around the world. I'm Dave Bittner from the CyberWire, and joining me, as always, is Joe Carrigan. He's from the Johns Hopkins University Information Security Institute. Hello, Joe.
Hi, Dave.
We've got some interesting stories to share, and later in the show, we've got Asaf Sidon. He's from Barracuda Networks. He's going to share some of the trends his team is seeing when it comes to phishing and social engineering. But before we get into all of that, a quick word from our sponsors at KnowBe4. So, what's a con game? It's fraud that works by getting the victim to misplace their confidence in the con artist. In the world of security, we call confidence tricks social engineering. And as our sponsors at KnowBe4 can tell you, hacking the human is how organizations get compromised. What are some of the ways organizations are victimized by social engineering? We'll find out later in the show. And we are back. Joe, before we jump into our stories, we've got some follow-up from a listener.
Very good.
Listener named George wrote in. Last week, I believe, we talked about some issues with Office 365, people who are getting phished. And George wrote in and said, if the Office 365 business, enterprise, or government subscriptions have O365 Advanced Threat Protection established, the phishing attack should be mitigated. All links sent via email to the subscriber would go through the O365 link washing machine to determine if the URL is malicious or not. Once the subscriber clicks or taps on the link, it would either go through as normal or a landing page would show up indicating that it is malicious. So ATP, this advanced threat protection, provides an additional layer of security, and it does not in any way diminish the need for phishing, social engineering, security awareness training. So interesting. This is kind of that, pre-detonation thing that I like to think about, where they automatically look at the link, take it off somewhere, off in the middle of a virtual desert.
Right, an open field.
Right, an open field, blow it up to see what happens, and only then do they feed it to you after they've made sure that there's nothing wrong with it. Right. So good information. Thank you, George, for sending that in. Sounds like a nice additional layer you can have on top of your Office 365
defense
stuff
in depth.
there. There you go.
It's always a good thing.
All right, so let's dig into our stories here.
All right.
Joe, I have a confession to make. This is a true story. This happened to me.
Okay.
I was driving home from work one day. It's about a year ago, driving down Route 95 out of Baltimore.
Right.
And I come to the exit ramp that leads to where I live. And over on the exit ramp, I see there's a vehicle pulled over to the side. It's a minivan. And there's a gentleman standing next to the van, and he's waving his hands frantically, trying to get me to pull over and help. So I do. I'm a gentleman. Right. I do. I pull over. He comes up to the car. I roll down the window. He says, thank you so much for helping. I'm out of gas. My wife and child are in the car there. Can you help? And I said, well, certainly.
Yes.
I'd be happy to help you. I said, I tell you what, why don't you get in the car? We're just a mile or so away from a gas station, and I'll drive you there. We can get you some gas. I'll drive you back. You'll be on your way.
Right.
And he says, no, I can't do that. I don't feel right leaving my wife and child behind. He says, I tell you what, he says, let me give you some of my jewelry. Just give me some money. Give me $20.
Right.
And let me give you some of my jewelry. That way you'll know that I'll pay you back. And I said, sir, you're in need. I don't need your jewelry. I said, here. So I gave the guy $20. I wished him well.
Right.
And went on my way, feeling good about myself that I'd stopped and helped a fellow man.
Yes.
So time passes, and I'm sitting home, and I see a story come on the local news, and it says, exit scammers. Police are looking for information on a sudden uptick in people who pretend like their cars are disabled at the side of the road. They try to get you to give them money by offering you worthless costume jewelry.
Right. And you're going, this sounds vaguely familiar.
Yes. I'm going, Because I'm sort of going through the stages of denial of going, well, maybe it wasn't. And then they say, and they do this. And I'm like, yeah, that's exactly what he did. That's exactly.
And here's a picture of him. Oh, right. That's the guy.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So sure enough, I got scammed.
Okay. Well, if you recall back when we started this podcast, you and I both discussed this kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And you and I both arrived at the conclusion that at some point in time, we know we're going to get scammed.
Right.
And we would rather be scammed if something is relatively innocuous than leave somebody, one of our fellow humans, in need.
That's right.
Right?
That's right.
And we agreed that's okay.
Yeah.
For us. I mean, what are you out? You're out $20.
I'm out $20.
Right.
You know what? The ideal situation for this for me would have been to have been scammed and not have found out that it was a scam. because then I still could have felt good about myself. I could have felt like I'd helped a fellow human. I'm out $20 either way. Either I'm helping someone or I'm being scammed. It's $20 I don't have. It's $20 I can afford, right?
Right.
My children are still going to eat. My mortgage is still going to be paid.
Right.
So it made me sad. I had to check myself to make sure that it didn't, build up my calluses and my cynicism a little bit and say, no, this is the decision I've made, the choice I've made in life, that I'd rather be a helpful person.
Right.
And every now and then be scammed rather than be cold and say, no, I'm sorry, I can't help you. Just keep on driving if there's someone who's truly in need.
Right. The way around this, Dave.
Yeah.
If you will allow me to be the armchair quarterback here.
Okay, please.
And give you
it's what I live for.
My Monday morning advice. What you should have done.
Yeah.
Is said, okay, well, I'm not going to give you the cash, but I'll be right back with a can of gas to put in your car.
Yeah.
But here's the thing, though.
I did think about that.
That
go on.
Takes time.
Right.
Right. So first off, he's on an exit ramp, which is not an accident. Because if he's on the side of the road, right, you drive the gas station, you drive back to him on the side of the road, and you put the gas in his car.
Mm-hmm.
If you're on an exit ramp on 95 and you're coming south from Baltimore,
right,
now you have to get back on 95.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to have to drive north at least one exit, get off on that exit, and then head south on that exit to come back to where he is.
It's an hour of my time.
Right. It's a lot of time. Yep. This is very clever, actually. Mm-hmm. So as I'm sitting here trying to give you the hindsight advice, right?
Yeah.
Like Captain Hindsight from South Park, what you should have done. I'm sitting here going, this is a very clever ruse.
Yeah.
Right? I'm starting to be more and more impressed with this. Generally, people don't like to hear you talk well about scammers, right? Because they're bad guys and they're scamming people out of their money. But they are creative. And putting the scam on the exit ramp is genius.
Yeah.
Because it makes it very difficult for you to physically help them.
Now, what do you suppose happens if the police officer pulls up behind him and says, sir, what's going on here?
I think it depends on what's going on at the time the police officer pulls up. If the police officer pulls up to him just on the side of the road, right, and there's nobody else around, then he goes, my kid was sick and I just needed to pull over.
Right.
And he's better now. I just put him back in the car seat. I'll see you later. And he drives away.
Yeah.
Right. If the police officer pulls up while he's talking to good old Dave, right?
Well, but I think this person could have gotten $100 an hour easy.
Yeah.
I mean, this is a profitable scam, I think.
I think it is. Yeah. We've heard over and over again from social engineers, one of the biggest drives we have as humans is to help other humans. Right. So they prey on that and they get money out of it.
Yeah. So the lesson is I'm an easy target.
So if you see Dave driving down the road.
If you see me driving down the road, if I'm walking down the street, I'm the guy you want to hit up for money because I will likely give it to you and away you go. So good, congratulations. So, all right, Joe. So that's what I've got this week. That is my confession of the week. What do you have for us?
All right, Dave. My story comes from the good folks over at Cyber Radio. A story that kind of ties in with one of our old Catch of the Day stories.
Okay.
So you remember a while ago, we had a realtor send us an email about getting phished on DocuSign.
Right.
Well, malicious actors have apparently a history of targeting real estate transactions. Most of the time, real estate fraud comes from business email compromise.
Okay.
Right. So it's commonly the result of a spear phishing attack. There are a ton of people involved in a real estate transaction.
Right.
You own a house.
Yeah.
I own a house. As I told you earlier, one of my very first jobs in my failed sales career was a real estate agent. There's the real estate agent. the real estate broker, who can be two different people.
Mm-hmm.
Generally, if you're buying a house, you don't hear from the broker. You just deal with the agent. There can be a lender, right, that has staff. There can be a loan officer that you're talking to. And then there can be a title company or the settlement company that you're going to. And there's also a title insurance company, which is separate. So that's just the list of companies, organizations involved. So it's a very big attack surface.
Right. And there's inspectors. You can have radon inspections or bug inspection. There's all... Just beyond those main people, there's also a web of support companies who have their hands in this complicated transaction.
But the inspectors are not where the big money is.
Right. Okay.
Right? I'm going to pay $300 for a guy to come out and inspect my house. If I'm an attacker and I'm looking at this, I'm saying $300, I can try to scam somebody out of $300 for a bug inspection, or I can try to scam somebody out of $20,000 settlement down payment. That's where I'm going.
Okay.
What they do is compromise someone's email account.
Okay.
And then they'll say, okay, it's time for you to wire money to me, and it'll be the criminal's address, right? They'll step into the transaction as it's coming towards settlement, and they'll start capitalizing on that. Now, imagine you're trying to buy a house.
Right.
You get an email from the title company. It says, wire the money here, right? And you wire the money there, and you go to settlement, and the settlement company goes, okay, where's your check? And you go, my check, I wired the money to you. And they say, you didn't wire any money to us. Now you're out whatever that money was that you wired to them, right? And you can't buy your house now because that was probably all the money you had saved up for the transaction.
Right.
Right? You're hosed.
Double whammy.
Exactly. It's devastating.
Yeah.
Now, the folks over at Proofpoint Security says they routinely spot these kind of attacks using DocuSign, right? So some aren't meant to steal people's DocuSign credentials, but rather other email credentials. Then they create a fake DocuSign landing page.
I see.
Right? So then they can try to propagate these scams out to other agents or other customers. One of the things they found was something that looked like it came from a lender that had online disclosures and everything, because there's tons of disclosures in these in these processes.
Yeah.
And they're abusing that process. And one attack was saying, here's some important documents you need to read and sign. And the documents are malicious. Right?
I see.
Or the links to the documents are malicious.
Ways to harvest your credentials and then pivot from there.
So Sherrod DeGrippo, who is the director of emerging threats over at Proofpoint, said that fraudsters target real estate transactions, and here's what you were getting at earlier, because they are fast-paced by their nature, and they involve communications with tons of people, and that communication is very voluminous, right? Is that the right word, voluminous?
I think so. It's good enough.
Okay. It means there's copious amounts of it. So I'll use another 50-cent word.
Yeah, nice. Well, and I think if I could just say it's a crescendo. Right. As you make your way towards settlement day, it sort of escalates and escalates.
It gets more and more stressful as this process goes on. Right.
Because everything happens at the last minute.
It does. You will be sitting there in the process. And this has happened to me both times I bought a house. We bought a townhouse and then we moved up to the house we live in now. And both times, almost nothing happens for like the first 45 days of the process. And then in the last 3 days before settlement, everything goes crazy.
Yep.
It's just the nature of the beast.
It is.
So you're going to get a lot of calls. You're going to be getting a lot of emails. Customers should be extremely vigilant in interactions with these parties.
Yeah.
Right. So in other words, when you get an email from one of these people, I think it's important that you follow up with a phone call that you make out to the people confirming the email.
Yeah, well, certainly anything that has to do with large sums of money.
Right.
Take the 5 minutes, make the phone call, and just verify. Right. This is what needs to happen.
I'm going to talk about how this works in Maryland. I don't know how it works in the other 49 states.
Okay.
But typically in Maryland, when you go to settlement, you need to bring a certified check from a bank for the amount. I have never seen in the multiple transactions I've been part of, myself, my family, and working as a real estate agent briefly, I've never seen a title company or a settlement company say, wire the money. They have always said, bring a certified check from the bank. So if you see somebody saying, wire the money here in Maryland or probably most of the United States, that should be a red flag, right? Instantaneously, you should stop what you're doing and go, that's not right.
Yeah.
Here's the big crux of this. In 2017, the FBI received over 10,000 complaints about real estate transaction fraud, and the fraud cases resulted in losses of more than $56 million. which is a lot of money.
It is a lot of money. It's almost as much as your house cost.
Almost, Dave. I am rolling around on all this podcast money.
Yes, that's right. Yes, as are we all.
Right.
All right, Joe. Well, it's a good story as always. Let's move on. It's time for our catch of the day. So, Joe, this week's catch of the day was sent in to us by a listener. His name is Russell. And he said, "Hi, Joe and Dave. I thought you might like this one for your Hacking Humans podcast. I'm down the bottom end of the planet in Australia, and I use Apple Mail as my mail client, which recently flagged this as spam. So I took a screenshot for you. I'm not sure the authors really got the idea of how phishing emails work, unless I am mistaken, and LinkedIn now moonlights as a Himalayan tourist advocate." It says only Google and Kaspersky rate this as a phishing scam on Virus Total.
Really?
As of today. So here's the email. It's just a regular looking email. Here it is. Dear LinkedIn user, as part of our efforts to improve your experience in LinkedIn access across our consumer services, we're updating LinkedIn Services Agreement and Privacy. Click the link below to update your account. Now, the link below goes to a website that is humanity-himalayan-mountains.pt. Your account will be deactivated if you do not update. This notice ends Wednesday, August 22nd, 2018. We apologize for any inconvenience. Thank you for your cooperation. Sincerely, LinkedIn Service Provider.
Not LinkedIn.
No, LinkedIn Service Provider.
LinkedIn Service Provider.
Yep. Yeah. So pretty straightforward catch here. Also interesting, and I don't know if this is how his particular mail client rendered out this message, but the fact that they did not try to obfuscate the obviously not LinkedIn link,
right,
by making it clickable, having it be the link to some plain text.
The actual URL to where you're going.
Right. The URL is sitting right out there in plain text.
Right.
So I don't know if that's the way his mail software rendered it out or if that was just a mistake on the spammer's part.
You know what I envision? I envision two spammers sitting in a room, one going, I think these people are really dumb. And the other guy going, no, I think they just fall for us because we're genius. He goes, no, let me show you how stupid people are.
I see. Okay. That's
and he says
plausible.
Right.
Plausible. All right. Well, thanks, Russell, for sending that in. That is our catch of the day. Coming up next, we've got my interview with Asaf Sedone from Barracuda Networks. He's going to share some of the trends that his team has seen when it comes to phishing and social engineering. But before we get to all that, a quick word from our sponsors at KnowBe4. And now we return to our sponsor's question about forms of social engineering. KnowBe4 will tell you that where there's human contact, there can be con games. It's important to build the kind of security culture in which your employees are enabled to make smart security decisions. To do that, they need to recognize phishing emails, of course, but they also need to understand that they can be hooked by voice calls. This is known as vishing, or by SMS texts, which people call smishing. See how your security culture stacks up against KnowBe4's free test. Get it at knowbe4.com/fishtest. That's knowbe4.com/fishtest. Joe, I recently had the opportunity to speak with Asaf Sedone. He's the Vice President of Email Security at Barracuda Networks. He shared what his team has been seeing when it comes to phishing and social engineering. Here's my interview.
There's several areas that are of particular interest. The first one, probably most notable, is attacks that we call account takeover, where the attackers successfully phish someone within the target organization, could be a low-level employee, for example, and then actually steal that person's credentials. So they'll, for example, send an email that appears to be coming, let's say, from Microsoft Outlook, leading the person to a fake sign-in page where they'll try to, steal their credentials. And then they'll use those credentials to actually log in as that employee and then send emails from that employee's legitimate email client. So they'll actually, send out emails to other employees, maybe phishing other employees or maybe trying to do kind of a business email compromise where they steal, a wire transfer from the company. So we've been seeing those grow a lot in the last few months. And what makes them really nefarious is they're actually coming from the real email address from the employee of within the organization. So they're obviously a lot harder to catch and a lot harder to spot, especially when they're well executed. So that's one line of attack that we've been seeing and are really focused on. Another big one is just generally targeted phishing and spear phishing. So we've been seeing a lot of attacks in different sectors. For example, the real estate industry has been just bombarded with attacks. Any different types of organizations in the real estate industry, like the actual agents or the title companies or real estate management firms. Oftentimes, what attackers will do is they'll try to trick one of the folks in the firm, again, steal the credentials, then do reconnaissance, find out, when are the deals about to happen, who's going to execute the deal. And then, for example, let's say you're about to buy a house, you're about to wire transfer money for your down payment to a title company. You'll get an email supposedly from that title company telling you, hey, Dave, this is the bank account you should use for the wire transfer. And that bank account is obviously owned by the attacker.
So taking advantage of the fact that large amounts of money are being planned to be exchanged, and also a period in someone's life when it's likely that emails are going to be being sent back and forth to coordinate those kinds of things.
Exactly. And I think the real estate example is actually especially nefarious because it's in a sense targeting consumers, which we can talk a lot about how to make sure organizations are protected and how they can increase their security awareness. But consumers are often the most vulnerable, right, to these types of attacks. So it's quite tragic if someone loses their down payment because something like this.
Yeah. And I think a lot of us, when we think about phishing attacks, we think of sort of the numbers game attacks, the Nigerian prince scam, of course, being the one that everyone, I guess, uses as the example. But you all see some longer term cons. What sort of stuff do you see there?
You touched on a really good point, right? So the kind of criminal market has evolved considerably in the last couple of years. I mean, it used to be that they just sent out these Nigerian print scams or fake Viagra pills or something like that, and just send it to hundreds of millions of mailboxes and hope that 0.001% would be gullible enough to purchase or fall for the scam. They've really moved into a smaller number of targets but higher payoff model, kind of like a B2B instead of a B2C, business to consumer, a business to business model, right? Where they're willing to invest more time in researching their targets, willing to invest more time in waiting and gathering reconnaissance, but then the payoffs are much, much higher and they can dupe, their conversion rate, so to speak, right? Their chance of success per target is higher. And that has been shown that it's a lot more lucrative for them. So the FBI actually has been working very hard on stopping these attacks and assembling data on these attacks. And in fact, they compile an annual report that they release every year that kind of aggregates the data that they've collected. And I don't think they've released the report for 2017 yet, as far as I've seen, but for 2016, the data shows that it's over $5 billion in losses from these types of attacks. So it's a really big market from a criminal perspective, and that's why it's so effective. And yeah, we've definitely, as the example I talked about earlier, the account takeover attacks. I mean, sometimes attackers are willing to sit for weeks and even months, targeting an organization. They steal the credentials of an employee and they don't actually use that credential for many weeks after that. Or they might sell that credential to someone else, who's willing to pay a premium to get a credential of an employee of a certain organization. And then that attacker will launch an attack that's really targeted to that organization. So they've become very sophisticated. And frankly, if you're sitting in East Asia or Eastern Europe, or in a developing country, you can afford to actually employ a team of folks that will be looking through social media accounts of companies, buying lists, doing a little bit of research to do these attacks. I mean, they are more sophisticated, but they don't involve any cutting edge technology or you don't need to be a foreign, intelligence service or something like that to do these. It's not such a sophisticated operation to set up.
Can you give us a glimpse behind the scenes there at Barracuda? I mean, what sorts of things are you working on to gather the information that you gather and to help protect your clients?
We really work on various levels of the security stack to try to help our customers. I think the most interesting thing we do to solve these particular attacks that I've talked about is actually use artificial intelligence. And so the basic idea is actually pretty simple, behind all the buzzwords. Basically, we develop systems that can learn what's normal and what's irregular in an organization. So we basically, observe the communication patterns of, let's say, employees of a company over time, and we learn, who speaks to whom, what email addresses they use, how do they, what types of the text, the kind of style they use to communicate, who are the folks in the organization that deal with sensitive information, what links, domains does the company typically send in emails. And then we basically trained AI classifiers that can identify anomalous behavior. So I'll give you an example. Let's say one day suddenly your accountant starts sending 10 emails to people they've never communicated with before in the company with kind of funny grammar, let's say, and a link that's going to a website that just kind of weird, right? It might not be obviously a malicious website, but it's an obscure website that, that person, nobody in the company has never, referenced before. So that would be an example of behavior that, our system, it's called Sentinel, would be able to flag and automatically detect and kind of stop. A lot of the work we do is, in the security world, there's been a lot of work in the past of let's create a rule, if we see the word Viagra, it must be an attack, or, if we see certain keywords or we see certain websites or certain links being sent, then it must be an attack. But it's really hard to apply that kind of fixed rule approach to this problem because the attackers, again, as we said, they're smart. They tailor the attacks. They're not sending the same, attack to a million different people like the Viagra email. They're actually tailoring it to the specific organization. And so something like AI is much more flexible and kind of tune its rules based on the historical communication patterns of each customer. So it's very effective to stop these attacks.
What'd you think of that, Joe?
Well, first, Dave, I want to say that I didn't listen to that interview before recording my story.
He hit on some of the same sort of topics,
some of the same points, yeah.
A reinforcement there.
Right, exactly. Scammers are targeting these real estate transactions and, of course, other business transactions.
Yeah.
I want everybody to remember that, we talk about research being the first part and social engineering being the beginning of these attacks, but remember that email is the first kinetic action, if you will, in a hack, right? That I can't remember what the number is off the top of my head, but we hear different numbers ranging from 70 to 90% of when a company gets compromised. The attack starts with a malicious email. And what also is kind of interesting to hear is that last year there were $5 billion in losses, billion with a B, to these kind of attacks. It's getting to the point where you just can't trust email anymore. We can't trust it, Dave.
Well, it is interesting. I think about this from time to time. I know there have been things they've tried to graft onto email to make it more trustworthy, and so on.
Signatures. You can graft digital signatures on.
There are some, exactly. But why are we still using email? It's as if we're doing all of our business on postcards.
Right. Now, imagine if I could social engineer someone out of their credentials for signing an email. Now I can send verified emails to targets within the company. And
if your boss sends you an email that says, hey, if you don't wire this money in the next hour, we're going to lose a big deal.
Right.
You can understand why people would fall for that.
Absolutely.
Yeah, coming from what seems to be a legit source.
Right. And sometimes with the business email compromise, it is coming from, for all intents and purposes, what is a legit source.
Right.
The CEO's email address.
All right. Well, that is our show this week. We want to thank everyone for listening. And of course, we want to thank our sponsors at KnowBe4. They're the social engineering experts and the pioneers of new school security awareness training. Be sure to take advantage of their free phishing test, which you can check out at knowbe4.com/phish test. Thanks to the Johns Hopkins University Information Security Institute for their participation. You can learn more about them at isi.jhu.edu. The Hacking Humans podcast is proudly produced in Maryland at the startup studios of Data Tribe, where they're co-building the next generation of cybersecurity teams and technology. Our coordinating producer is Jennifer Iben. Our editor is John Petrick. Technical editor is Chris Russell. Executive editor is Peter Kilpie. I'm Dave Bittner.
And I'm Joe Kerrigan.
Thanks for listening.